The ballroom of the Mercer Foundation Gala had never gone silent before. Not once, not in 11 years of galas, of champagne, of men in tailored suits congratulating themselves under crystal chandeliers. It went silent the moment Carmen Prescott walked through the doors with a newborn asleep against her chest. 400 people stopped talking at once. Someone's glass paused halfway to their mouth and stayed there. A string quartet near the windows kept playing for 8 more bars before the musicians noticed nobody was listening anymore, and the first violin let her bow drop to her lap mid-note. 3 months earlier, Tristan Mercer had stood in this same room and ended his marriage in front of all of them. He had not meant to do it cruelly. He told himself that later, when it was too late to matter. He had simply stopped pretending, mid-sentence, mid-toast, with Valerie Monroe's hand resting on his arm and Carmen standing 8 feet away holding a glass of sparkling water she had not touched because she did not yet know she was pregnant. He had said the marriage was over. He had said it like a man announcing a merger. Carmen had not cried. She had set the glass down on a passing tray, walked to the coat check, and disappeared from his life with a quiet that unsettled him more than tears would have. He told himself she left because she could not handle his world. He told himself she was probably happier. He had not told himself the truth, because the truth required looking at himself, and Tristan Mercer had built an empire by never doing that. Now she was back. And she was holding a baby. Valerie Monroe felt her stomach drop before her mind caught up to why. She had spent 3 months becoming the woman everyone expected Tristan Mercer's next wife to be. She had not learned, because no one had told her, that Carmen Prescott was pregnant when she vanished. Tristan crossed the room before he decided to. His leg simply moved. Garrett Vaughn, his chief operating officer, caught his sleeve and asked if he was sure that was wise. Tristan did not answer. He was already 3 steps closer to the baby. Carmen saw him coming and did not step back. The baby in her arms was 6 weeks old. Her name was Nora. She had been born 9 weeks early, weighing barely 4 pounds, with a heart that did not close the way hearts are supposed to close after birth. The pregnancy had been quiet in a way Carmen had not expected loneliness to feel. She had pictured, before any of this, what it might look like: the hand on her stomach, a shared appointment, somebody's voice in the room when the technician turned the screen and said there's the heartbeat. Instead there had been a folding chair in a Seattle waiting room with peeling vinyl armrests, and the particular ache of watching other women's husbands lean forward in their seats when a name was called that wasn't hers. She watched one of them, in her 5th month, hold his wife's hand through the entire ultrasound and whisper something that made her laugh, and Carmen had looked down at her own hands, empty in her lap, and thought, simply, I used to have that too. She felt the first kick alone, at 11 at night, sitting up fast in an empty bed, her hand pressed flat against her stomach, and there was a full 30 seconds where she reached for her phone before she remembered there was no one left to call. She put the phone back down on the nightstand without unlocking it. She sat in the dark a long time afterward, smiling and crying at the same time, because both of those things were true and neither one cancelled the other out. She picked out a crib by herself from a catalogue, in a small apartment with no nursery yet, tracing her finger along a photograph of white-painted slats, trying to imagine a room that didn't exist yet for a child whose father didn't know she existed yet either. She built it herself, on a Sunday afternoon, with the instructions spread out on the floor and her own hand shaking slightly from effort she hadn't expected lifting boards like that alone would require. She did not let herself think too long about who should have been holding the other end of the headboard. There was one appointment, in her 7th month, when a nurse asked, gently, whether the baby's father would be joining for the growth scan. Carmen said no, simply, without elaboration. She sat in her car afterward for almost 20 minutes before she trusted herself to drive, not crying exactly, just absorbing the weight of being entirely alone in the one experience she had always imagined sharing. She had typed a text to Tristan 3 times in those months and deleted it 3 times before sending. Once just to say the due date had moved up. Once just to say she was scared. Once, the night before her water broke 9 weeks early, simply to say his name, nothing after it, as if even that much honesty was more than she could afford to send into a phone that might not answer. She deleted that one fastest of all. Nora arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, fast and frightening, and from the first hour of her daughter's life Carmen learned a new language layered on top of the first. A language of numbers on monitors, of oxygen saturation and murmur grades and the particular silence a doctor makes right before they say something they don't want to say. She spent more nights than she could count in the chair beside the incubator, learning to read the screens herself because there was no guarantee anyone would explain them fast enough. She learned the difference between a number that simply needed watching and a number that needed a person to come running. She learned it the way you learn anything under enough fear, fast, permanently, without ever choosing to. The nurses on the night shift began to recognize her by the third week. "She's here again," one murmured once to a colleague coming on shift, not unkindly, and Carmen pretended not to hear it, though something in the word settled into her chest like a strange small comfort. There was a night she sat in the hospital's tiny chapel at 4 a.m, because the family room was full and she needed somewhere quiet that wasn't beside the incubator, and she found herself holding the small folded blanket Nora had come home wrapped in from the delivery room, the only thing of her daughter small enough to carry with her, and she pressed it to her. The cardiologist in Seattle had finally said the word she had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Urgent. The procedure existed in exactly 3 hospitals in the country capable of performing it on an infant her size, and the nearest one was in Chicago, where the surgical team operated under a research program funded almost entirely by the Mercer Foundation. Pride had stopped being something Carmen could afford the day a stranger in scrubs told her, as kindly as the words allowed, that her daughter's heart was running out of time. Tristan stopped 2 feet away from her. He looked at the baby's face for a long moment before he looked at Carmen's. "Whose is she?" he said finally. It was not really a question. It was a man asking permission to feel something he had no right to feel yet. Carmen looked at him steadily. "Yours." Valerie, somewhere behind him, made a small sound. Tristan did not turn around to see what kind of sound it was. He reached out one hand, slowly, the way a person reaches toward something they are not sure is allowed to be real. Carmen did not pull away. "She's so small," Tristan said, his voice cracking on the last word. "She was born early," Carmen said. "Her heart didn't finish closing the way it's supposed to. She needs surgery, Tristan. Soon. That's why I'm here. Not for you. For the medical fund." "You should have called me," he said. "I did call you," Carmen said quietly. 3 months ago. From the hallway outside this exact room. You didn't pick up because you were already standing in there telling 400 people our marriage was over." He had no answer for that. Whispers moved through the crowd. Phones came out around the edges of the room, discreetly. Tristan could feel hundreds of eyes deciding, in real time, what kind of man he actually was. "It's not a conversation at all," Valerie said, finally finding her voice, sharper now. "Carmen, this is beneath you. Coming here, with a baby, making a scene." "I'm not making a scene," Carmen said, without raising her voice. "I'm asking the foundation to honor a medical commitment that exists whether or not you're standing next to my husband." Valerie's eyes flicked, just once, toward Nora. "Are we even certain this is actually his?" she said, choosing each word like a blade. "It would be a very convenient story, wouldn't it? A baby. A medical emergency. Right when his name is the only one that can pay for it." The room went somehow even quieter than it already was. Carmen did not flinch. "My daughter has been on a heart monitor since the night she was born. I have spent 6 weeks alone in a hospital learning what every beat means. I did not come here for a story. I came here because she might not survive the wait if I don't." She paused. "You can ask whatever question makes you feel safer, Valerie. It doesn't change what's true." It was the calmest sentence anyone had said since Carmen walked in, and it was the one that did the most damage. To understand what happened next, it helps to go back to the week everything actually broke. It started with a folder. Carmen had found a consulting agreement in Tristan's desk, $200,000 a quarter, paid to a company called Monroe Strategic Partners. She had read further, quietly, and understood enough. Valerie Monroe was being paid to make herself indispensable in Tristan's life while his wife was eased out of the frame one gala seating chart at a time. There was one more thing, something that had nothing to do with Valerie at all. Carmen's late father, Walter Prescott, had worked at Mercer Holdings in its earliest years, decades before Tristan's father took it public. Before he died, he had given Carmen a single old document, a founding shareholder agreement listing his name, a stake that had never been formally bought out, simply forgotten. She had been planning to confront Tristan honestly when he stood up at that gala and ended things first, before she ever got the chance. So she left. Not with a plan for revenge. She left because she was pregnant, frightened, and tired of being the only person in the marriage still trying. She told no one but her sister Faith where she went. She quietly hired a lawyer in Seattle, Morgan Blake, to confirm whether a 60-year-old shareholder document could still mean anything. It took Morgan 11 weeks to confirm that it did. It took Nora's heart 11 weeks to remind Carmen that none of it mattered as much as getting her daughter into an operating room in time. Back at the gala, Tristan moved everyone into a private room. Dalton Reed, his attorney, arrived within minutes. "I need the Foundation's medical fund to approve Dr. Holden Price's surgical team," Carmen said, before anyone else could speak. "Tonight, if possible." Filed under Nora Prescott. "I'm not here to discuss anything else." "You didn't give her my name," Tristan said quietly. "You didn't give us a reason to," Carmen said. "Tonight I need a doctor, not a last name." Garrett Vaughn looked up from his phone. "She's right. I'm sorry, Carmen. We should have made this easier on you before you ever had to walk in that door tonight." It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her all night. Tristan signed the approval himself. His hand shook slightly. Carmen noticed. She decided not to mention it. Surgery was scheduled for 4 days later, at Lakeshore Children's Hospital, under Dr. Holden Price. The second of those 4 nights was the one Carmen would never fully describe to anyone, not even Faith. She had fallen asleep in the chair beside the incubator a little after 1 a.m, her fingers through the small opening against her daughter's palm. The monitor woke her before her own mind did. A high, flat, insistent alarm, different from the chirps she had trained herself to ignore. Nora's numbers were falling, 91, then 88, then a number Carmen had never seen on that screen before, faster than anything she'd watched fall in 6 weeks of watching. Nurses filled the room. Then a doctor. Then a second, speaking in clipped half-sentences Carmen couldn't fully follow, words traded between them too fast to be meant for a mother to understand. "Sats dropping. Get respiratory. Hold on the feed." Carmen stood pressed against the wall trying to read their faces instead of their words, because faces were the only language left she still trusted herself to interpret, and every face in that room was unreadable in exactly the way that frightened her most. A hand on her shoulder moved her, gently but firmly, into the hallway, because there was no more room for a mother beside that incubator once it became a team's job instead of a vigil. Nobody explained anything. The door swung shut and Carmen stood outside it in a hallway lit too bright for the hour, both hands flat against the glass, watching shapes in scrubs move quickly around something she could not see. The silence in that hallway, after the alarm finally stopped, was worse than the alarm itself had been. An alarm means someone is still fighting. Silence could mean anything. Tristan arrived 11 minutes in, having driven straight from a meeting the second Garrett texted him. He found Carmen alone at that window, and for one terrible moment neither of them needed to ask the other anything. "What happened?" he said. "I don't know," Carmen said, her voice breaking on the second word, the only time it had broken all night. "Nobody will tell me anything." She was fine. She was fine, Tristan, and then she wasn't. She stopped herself. Her hands were shaking. For one raw second, something in her wanted to turn on him, wanted to say this is what you would have known if you'd been here, this is what 6 weeks of this feels like alone. She didn't. She pressed her lips together instead, because falling apart at him would not bring her daughter's numbers back up. Tristan stood beside her instead, close enough that she could feel he was there, and said nothing, because for once he understood there was nothing useful to say. It was 19 minutes before a nurse told them Nora had stabilized. A mucus plug, cleared now, unrelated to the heart defect itself. Routine, in the strange language of a NICU. It had not felt routine to either of them. Carmen sat down hard, her leg simply giving out from under the relief of it. I almost said something I would have regretted, she said quietly, once she could speak again. You didn't, Tristan said. I wanted to. I know, he said. I think I would have deserved it. It was the next morning, over coffee neither of them drank, that Faith finally said the thing she'd been holding back. You should see what's on her phone, she told Tristan. 18 weeks of doctor's appointments. Alone. Ultrasound photos she sent to nobody because there was nobody to send them to. She pulled up the photos herself. Grainy black and white images, one after another, a due date that had quietly moved earlier twice, a note Carmen had typed to herself after one appointment and never sent to anyone, heartbeat strong today. Wish someone else knew that. Tristan scrolled further than Faith had meant to let him, and found the things underneath the photos, a video, for seconds long, of the first kick caught on screen, the date stamped at 2 in the morning, a note titled Crib with a single link to a catalogue page and nothing else, a voice memo, never sent, just labelled 11:47 p.m., that he didn't have the courage to play in front of either of them. He looked at that sentence about the heartbeat for a long time. I didn't just miss the wedding toast, he said quietly. I missed the first ultrasound. I missed the first kick. I missed choosing a crib with her. I missed every appointment where she sat in a room full of strangers and heard our daughter's heartbeat completely alone. He stopped, like the next sentence cost him something to finish. I didn't just lose a marriage. I missed becoming her father, for 6 months, while I was busy becoming someone else's mistake. Faith didn't soften that for him. Yeah, she said. You did. That night, long after Faith and Carmen had fallen asleep, Tristan sat alone beside Nora's incubator. I missed the first 6 weeks, he said, barely above a whisper. I won't miss the rest. He didn't say anything else. He sat there another hour, just watching her breathe. Surgery day arrived with a particular kind of stillness. The waiting room filled slowly through the morning. Garrett brought coffee nobody drank. At one point, a nurse walked past the window carrying nothing important, and Carmen's whole body went rigid before she registered it meant nothing. Tristan reached over without thinking and put his hand over hers. She let him. An hour in, a father 2 seats down began crying quietly into his hands for a different child entirely, and the grief moved through the waiting room like a current. Carmen watched him for a moment, then looked away, because some kinds of pain were too familiar to watch for long without feeling them in her own chest. Dr. Holden Price walked in 5 days later and said the repair had closed properly. Barring the ordinary fragility of any newborn, Nora was going to be fine. Carmen cried then, finally, the way a person cries when 6 weeks of held breath finally has somewhere to go. Tristan cried too, quietly, standing a few feet away, present but not pressing. A nurse brought Nora out from recovery, swaddled, sleeping, a faint pink in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. Carmen held her first. Then, without anyone asking her to, she stepped forward and placed Nora carefully into Tristan's arms. He held his daughter like something that might still disappear if he moved wrong. No one said anything for a long time. I'm not asking you to come back, Tristan said eventually. I just want to be her father. Actually be it. You stopped being my husband long before you stopped wearing the ring, Carmen said quietly. I needed a father for my daughter. Not another apology. Then tell me what to do instead. Show up, Carmen said. Every time. Because she's yours, and a child shouldn't have to wait for an adult to grow up. It was 3 days later that Valerie tried one last time, calling Tristan's private line. I never lied about wanting you, Tristan, she said. We could still. There's no we, Tristan said, level, almost gentle. Some absences are loud enough to change a life, Valerie. Mine was. Yours is going to be permanent. He hung up before she could answer. Valerie sat afterward in her apartment for a long time without moving, the phone still in her hand, and understood something she hadn't let herself understand until that exact moment. She had spent a year studying every room Carmen had ever stood in, learning which charities mattered, which photographs mattered, which seat at which table mattered, certain that strategy was the same thing as winning. Carmen had never once fought her for any of it. Carmen had simply kept showing up for a sick baby and a forgotten piece of paper, and somewhere in all that quiet, ordinary persistence, she had ended up with everything that had ever actually mattered, without ever once needing to take it from anyone. Valerie had played a long, careful game for a man's attention. Carmen had simply been loved by his daughter, and it turned out that was the only hand at that table that was ever going to win. In the weeks that followed, the rest resolved quietly. Garrett's investigation confirmed Valerie had been close to someone with a financial interest in seeing Tristan's company struggle. Tristan ended every remaining arrangement and chose not to drag the matter through a public courtroom. What mattered more was a baby who slept soundly now without wires, and a father who flew in every other weekend, learning slowly how to hold a daughter who was no longer fragile in the way she had been in that incubator, only fragile in the way every child is. There was a Tuesday, weeks later, when Carmen watched Tristan sit on the floor of her apartment for 40 minutes trying to make Nora laugh. Nothing worked. He tried again anyway, and on the 41st try, Nora laughed, a real laugh, sudden and startled, like even she hadn't expected it. Tristan froze, then laughed too, and looked up at Carmen with an expression so unguarded it almost embarrassed her to witness it. It was around that time that Mercer Holdings' board called an emergency session. The boardroom on the 40th floor was the kind of room built to remind people who belonged in it. 12 board members, Garrett Vaughn near the head of the table, Dalton Reed, and a second attorney sitting with a stack of folders nobody had explained yet. Most assumed it concerned the foundation, or perhaps the Monroe matter. A few, glancing at the date, assumed it might simply be a courtesy update about Tristan's daughter. Carmen walked in at exactly the appointed time, without an entourage, carrying nothing but a single folder under one arm. Wesley Grant, a silver-haired director with 19 years on that board, cleared his throat. "I understand congratulations are in order. The little one is doing well, I hope." "She is," Carmen said. "Thank you." Dalton Reed stood. "Before we move to the scheduled matters, the board needs to review a document that affects the company's ownership structure. It concerns a shareholder agreement dating back to the company's founding." A ripple went through the table. The page made its way around in near silence. A few people read it twice. "This lists a Walter Prescott," Wesley Grant said slowly, "as an original shareholder. He worked alongside my father in the earliest years," Tristan said. "Before any of us were born into what this became. This stake was never bought out," Dalton said. "It simply continued to exist, unclaimed, for 60 years. A younger board member near the window looked at Carmen. "Prescott," she said quietly, as if testing whether the name meant what she thought it meant. "He was my father," Carmen said simply. "He gave me this agreement before he died. I didn't fully understand what it meant for a long time. I'm not sure I wanted to." Wesley Grant set the page down slowly, his hand resting on top of it. "Assuming the value has compounded the way these things compound. Mrs. Prescott's stake," Dalton said, "makes her one of the largest individual shareholders this company has." The room did not erupt. It simply stopped. One of the longest-serving directors, a woman who had sat across 100 tables from people she had quietly underestimated, looked at Carmen the way you look at a painting you've walked past in a hallway for years without ever once stopping to read the small plaque beside it. "You've been sitting in galas, in hospital waiting rooms, in this building's lobby, for years," she said, almost to herself. "And the entire time." "I never came here for that," Carmen said. "I came here because my father gave me something and asked me to keep it safe. I never used it when my marriage ended. I never used it at the gala, when it would have been very easy to. I'm not using it now to win anything. I'm only here because hiding it any longer felt dishonest, and I've had enough of that for one lifetime." Garrett looked at her with something close to quiet astonishment. "You could have ended this entire conversation a year ago," he said. You never did. I didn't want leverage, Carmen said. I wanted a husband who didn't need to be cornered into being honest. This isn't a consolation prize for not getting that. It's just the truth, finally, in the room it always belonged in. Tristan said nothing for a long moment. She never needed any of this from me, he said quietly, more to himself than the table. Any of it. She could have taken this whole room apart at any point and chose not to. Wesley Grant looked at Carmen, and something had changed in his voice entirely. Mrs. Prescott, he said, correcting himself to use her own name, the board will need time to formalize all of this. But I think I can speak for the table when I say, we owe you an apology none of us knew we needed to give. We misjudged you for years, and you let us, and somehow that says more about you than it does about us. Carmen simply nodded. Thank you. I'd like Nora's research fund to be the first thing we discuss once the paperwork is settled. That matters more to me than anything else in this room. She gathered her folder and left the way she had entered it, without theater, without a single backward glance. A year after the gala, on a warm Saturday afternoon, the Mercer Foundation held a small fundraiser at Lakeshore Children's Hospital for the newly named Walter Prescott Pediatric Cardiac Research Fund. It was not large. It was not for cameras. Carmen had insisted on that. Nora, 14 months old by then, stood unsteadily between her parents on the lawn outside the hospital, one hand gripping Carmen's fingers, the other reaching toward Tristan, who crouched a few feet away with his arms open, not pulling, just waiting. She let go of her mother's hand. She took 3 wobbling, determined steps across the grass and fell straight into her father's arms, laughing the same sudden, startled laugh from the apartment floor months earlier. Tristan lifted her up, and for one unguarded second he looked over her small shoulder at Carmen, and Carmen looked back, and neither of them needed to say anything at all. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a beginning. It was simply 2 parents, on an ordinary Saturday, watching their daughter take her first steps toward both of them at once, and understanding, for the first time without any grief attached to it, that some kinds of family don't need a marriage to be real. Tristan never stopped hoping Carmen would come back. He never said it out loud again after that hospital hallway, because he had finally learned the one lesson his entire empire had never taught him. Some people lose everything in a single mistake. Others lose it one decision at a time, so slowly they don't notice until the room goes quiet and a woman is standing in the doorway holding the only thing that was never actually his to take for granted. The hardest thing about forgiveness, Carmen would tell Faith much later, is that it doesn't erase memory. It just makes room to live beside it. Some things cannot be acquired. They can only be earned, slowly, by a man willing to wait without demanding, for a woman who owed him nothing and chose, in her own time, on her own terms, exactly how much of herself she was willing to give back. Whether she ever gave all of it back, no one outside that family ever really knew. What people did know, what the business press eventually wrote about with something close to admiration, was that Carmen Prescott had walked into a gala with a newborn in her arms, expecting nothing but a signature, and walked out, months later, as the one person in that entire empire who had never once needed it to survive.